Hi everybody, so welcome back to video 2. Today we're going to be talking about Anne Bonny. She is a very interesting woman, just like Julie Diabonnet. Anne Bonny was an Irish woman. She grew up in an Irish town named Cork. Her father was William Cormac, and her mother was his servant, Mary Brennan. So he was very fond of Bonny, but despite her being an illegitimate child, he dressed her as a boy in hopes to keep his marriage intact and called her Andy. He told everybody that he was just learning to be his clerk, and it worked for a while until a rumor got out that Bonny's gender is actually a girl. So they had to flee across the Atlantic Ocean to what is now called Charlestown in South Carolina. And this is where Bonny's father buys a plantation and he becomes a successful businessman. But it wasn't long after till Mary died in 1711. And that's when Bonny's temper really gets bad. So right after her mother dies, she starts getting into a lot of fights. She starts spending a lot of her time in taverns and sleeping with drunks. And on one account, she supposedly stabbed a girl with a kitchen knife after an argument. Another claimed she had killed her. So, yes, and another claim stated she had beat a man near to death after attempting to rape her. So, we see a lot of similarities between Julie Diabonnet and Anne Bonny with their temper wise. Johnson, I'll mention here Captain Charles Johnson. He wrote a book and he documented all these pirates. And the book is called The General History of the Robberies and Murders of Notorious Pirates. So I actually found his book. The link is right there. It was kind of like reading Shakespeare a little. It was a little confusing to follow along, but just reading Bonny's story right from his book was so interesting to me. Yeah, so Captain Charles Johnson is one of the few people to have documented some of the most fascinating pirates of the 18th century. I totally recommend reading just like at least Bonny's story, or even Mary Read's, which I'll get to in a second. So this is the 2D artwork that I chose. It's a lithograph for a cigarette company. Anne Bonny was such an influential character that she was often portrayed in novels and films, even commercial like cigarette product, you know. So Republic of Pirates. So Bonny's father did not approve of her behavior. She was getting pretty bad, and her father still had hope that she would find a respectable husband to take care of her. But that didn't really work out because Bonny got married to a poor sailor named James Bonny in 1718. And Johnson, in his book, actually writes about him and says he's not even worth a groat, which is a European coin. Yeah, this marriage was enough to disown Bonny, and she didn't really care. She just kind of took her new husband to the New Providence, Nassau, which is where the Republic of Pirates are, and that's in the Caribbean. So becoming a pirate, Bonny, kind of just like Julie Debonnaire, she got really bored quickly with her partners, and she got bored with James Bonny, and eventually she fell in love with Captain Jack Rackham. I always say Rackham. And he had his own ship. So this relationship between them, she kind of got like accepted onto the ship through Rackham, even though it was challenged. One of the crew members questioned her joining because women and young boys weren't allowed on ships because it was believed that it was bad luck. Um, Sorry, I lost my place. Yeah, so a crew member challenged Bonny, and Bonny decided to challenge him with a hand-to-hand combat fight, and eventually stabbed him in the heart and threw him overboard. And that was the end of that. And she was accepted onto the ship. So I'm going to talk a little about Mary Read, because you can't really talk about Anne Bonny without Mary Read. And I don't know why I included like a little paragraph at the top there just of what Anne Bonny would wear. And I wanted to just explain quickly that Anne Bonny would only wear men's attire when their ship was under attack. So all the other times she would wear her feminine clothing. So there was this one instance when Rackham took over a ship, conquered them, and by the code of the pirate code of conduct, he took remaining survivors and they would become part of his crew members. And one of them was Mary Read, which was another woman dressed as a man. Like, how, what a coincidence that uh, two women pirates would meet each other. In Johnson's book, he takes note of Bonny's interest towards Reed because she doesn't even know about Reed's actual gender yet. And Bonny kind of exposes herself to Reed and tells her that she's such a handsome young fellow. And to Bonny's disappointment, Reed exposed herself and showed her true gender. But this disappointment didn't really last long because um, they actually became lovers. um, yeah, and I also made a note that just like um, just like Bonny, Reed actually grew up as an illegitimate child. I can never say that word, and was also dressed as a boy and was named Mark. Menage a trois. So Bonny and Reed grew closer, and this is where Rackham gets extremely jealous because he doesn't even know about Reed's gender at this time. So he just sees him, well, her, as like another, like kind of just threat to Bonny, like to their relationship. So he threatens Reed to cut her throat. And that is when um, Bonny just tells him of the secret, and he is in on this newfound secret. And some accounts suggest that they actually like enter a polyamorous relationship between the three of them. So that's interesting. Okay, capture on the high seas. It was throughout the fall of 1720 when Rackham and his crew raided several fishing boats, taking captives and plunder. So this was the year when it was the end, basically, for all these three pirates. Rackham's luck was running short, and authorities were beginning to take notice of this. On September 5th, 1720, a proclamation from the Boston Gazette newspaper declared Rackham and his crew pirates and enemies to the crown of Great Britain. And this is also mentioned in Johnson's book as well. So Bonny and Reed were also taken notice, and when they took over a sloop, which is a sailboat, and authorities took notice of their very vulgar and aggressive behavior. In the proclamation, that was also written in the newspaper, Bonny and Reed's identity were publicly exposed. So the log caught up to all three pirates. The capture, the last night upon Rackham's ship, him and the entire crew were celebrating their string of good luck. So all the crew members were drinking, having a good time, but it was Bonny and Reed that noticed a ship quickly approaching them. So they started to warn the crew that they should be getting into like battle formation. But nobody was responding. Everybody was drunk, and there was a few crew members that were still sober, but they weren't brave enough to fight. So they actually fled below deck. Bonny and Reed were like among the few who were able to actually fight off the other ship, which didn't really work. And of course, they quickly were taken over. Reed cried out, "If there's a man among ye, you'll come up and fight like the men ye are to be." Furious at her crewmen, she fired her pistol towards the lower deck, killing a man. It was no use. Bonny, Reed, Rackham, and the rest of the crew were arrested and taken to Jamaica, where they stood trial. So all the pirates on Rackham's crew were sentenced to a hanging. And Rackham's one last request was to see Bonny, and she agrees. But Bonny didn't really give him any words of ease or comfort. All she said was she was sorry to see him there, but if he had fought like a man, he'd be not hang like a dog. I love these women. Bonny and Reed escaped the hanging sentence by pleading their bellies, which means that they were claiming they were both pregnant, and this worked. And they were sent back to jail, basically waiting until they would give birth, and then they would have been hanged. Reed didn't make it. She died a year later, and Bonny somehow miraculously escaped the noose. It's not really well known what happened to Bonny. Some say that what do some say about her? Sorry, I lost my track of thought here. Yeah, some say that her father's good reputation helped free her from jail, and she returned to South Carolina to live out her days, where she had several children. And some believe that she died early on, I think in jail. I think it's also interesting to note that even though these stories were published around the same time, stories like Bonny and Reed were suppressed from the public, not to give women any wild ideas. What a surprise. Just like Julie Diabonnet, we see these women breaking gender norms, which again stunned people at the time. And just to end this presentation, I wanted to end it with these statues because we've seen Anne Bonny's and Mary Read's story throughout just different novels, films, even manga. But this statue I find is just incredible. It represents the immortal friendship and love between Bonny and Reed. From Burr Island, they can watch over the waters where they found love and glory hundreds of years ago. So I hope you guys found this story as interesting as I did. And see you next week.